Thank you, Leslie. That was wonderful. Good morning, and welcome to the Vashon Island Unitarian Fellowship. My name is Sheila Ekman, and I'll be your service leader today. As a reminder, this service is being recorded and will be posted on our website. The recording will be stopped during joys and concerns. We apologize for the last-minute changes of the services today. As many of you know, we've been having problems with the heat at Lewis Hall. The heat has been out much of the past week, and Burton Church, our landlord, is working on repairs, but we couldn't be sure that the heat would be back on this morning, and it's really cold outside. Sitting in the cold is really unpleasant, and it's particularly hard on those of us who are older. So out of an abundance of caution, we chose to pivot to a Zoom meeting. And as many people before the service noted, we've really increased our Zoom skills since COVID. And one of the good things that COVID has brought us is the ability to come together on a Sunday morning, even if we can't be at Lewis Hall. And so we'll continue to use that option when we need it. And so count our blessings. We're a lay-led community, strengthened and enriched by weaving together the volunteer contributions of members and friends. Our community is supported and guided by our minister, Victoria Poling. If you are new, we're especially glad you're here. Please participate as you feel comfortable in the Sunday service. We are clear in our desire to acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Squamish Coast Salish Native people. The Puyallup and Muckleshoot people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond. As we settle in, we acknowledge that our congregation is committed to individual freedom of belief, welcomes diversity, seeks to promote a sense of community, and fosters religion which enriches the spirit. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you belong here. So you can unmute yourselves if you like right now and repeat after me. I'll give you a minute to do that. It is good.
It is good.
Good. It is good to be.
It is good to be.
It is good to be here together.
It is good to be here together.
On Zoom.
On Zoom.
Okay, please mute yourselves again. And I'd like to ask Marilee Runyon to light our chalice and share the chalice reading.
Thank you, Sheila. So imagine the chalice candle being lit. The reading is called Come Sit by Our Fire by Reverend Jennifer Kitchen. Come sit by our fire and let us share stories. Let me hear your tales of far-off lands, wanderer, and I will tell you of my travels. Share your experience of the holy with me, worshiper, and I will tell you of that which I find divine. Come and stay, lover of leaving, for ours is no caravan of despair, but of hope. We would hear your stories of grief and sorrow as readily as those of joy and laughter, for there is a time and a place and a hearing for all of the stories of this world. Stories are the breath and word of the spirit of life, that power that we name love. Come, for our fire is warm, and we have seats for all. Come again and yet again. Come speak to me of what fills your heart, what engages your mind, what resides in your soul. Come, let us worship together.
Hi, Vashon friends. I'm sort of sorry I can't be there with you in person today, but I'm happy to be in my own warm house, as I'm sure you are with yours. Oh, is that a cat? I see a cat tail. Yeah. My cat is locked away. Here is the first reading. This is called Two Ships by Adam Gopnik. And he wrote this in 2014, which was the centenary of the outbreak of World War I. And he encourages us to remember another series of events that happened shortly before the war that he calls that catastrophe. He says, lodged somewhere in our collective memory of that catastrophe is an image, a metaphor of hubris from just a year or so before. A great four-funneled ocean liner, the biggest and most luxurious ever built, whose passengers, rich and poor, crowd on board, the whole watched over by a bearded man named Edward John Smith, with the chief designer, Thomas Andrews, along for the maiden voyage too. Then the ship sets off from Southampton, sure of itself, unsinkable, until it comes to the ice fields of the North Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland and speeds right on through them to its anchorage here in New York. Because this ship isn't the Titanic, but its nearly identical twin sister, the Olympic, made at the same time by the same people to do the same job in the same way. The Olympic not only successfully completed its maiden voyage, but became known as Old Reliable, serving as a troop carrier in the First World War and sailing on for 20 years more. The story of the two ships is one to keep in mind as we peer ahead. It reminds us that our imagination of disaster is dangerously more fertile than our imagination of the ordinary. You have certainly heard of the Titanic. You've probably never heard of the Olympic. We have a fatal attraction to fatality. We don't have one movie called Titanic starring Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet about a tragic love and doomed adventure, and another called Olympic, a musical comedy starring Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway about a happy voyage over. We have only one movie. And remember, only one sad tale. If our history leads us to the First World War, then we imagine that we were always bound on that collision course. And we cannot imagine that with a bit of luck and another set of contingencies, we might have been on the Olympic, not the Titanic. We search for parallels of disaster and miss parallels of hope. And that's the end of the reading. Now I'm going to be introduced.
Okay, having trouble with my mute button this morning. So please welcome Amanda Aikman, who comes from to us from the hip waterfront town of Everett. For those of you who don't know her, Amanda is a retired UU minister. She has just finished writing her first novel, Miss Lister's Guest House. It'll be available very soon. I understand it is available now in paperback, and it'll soon be available in ebook formats. And what we're going to do is later she'll put the information in chat about her book, and we'll also have it in our newsletter. So those of you who want to read it can access it. So welcome, Amanda. We're glad to have you back.
I'd like to invite you to a time of prayerful meditation, just opening our hearts and our minds to the vastness that surrounds us. Spirit of life, you who embrace the vastness of space and us along with it, be with us today. Hold us in our worry, our exhaustion, our grief, and in our joy, our delight, our contentment. Keep us close as we sit with our truth, whatever that may be. Lead us to rest in the quiet, to find solace and renewal. You who have seen the rising and setting of suns, of seasons, of civilizations, remind us of all that we have learned from the history of the world and from our own histories. Give us the courage to face our mistakes and to repair them whenever possible. In this moment in time, accompanied as we are in a circle of love and care, we give thanks for this moment to be together. And we send our love and care to all around the world and nearby, all who are dealing with the grief of earthquakes and war and gunfire. Let us send out our radiant love in silence for a moment. May our senses be open to the beauty of this day and this season and this world. Blessed be. Amen. This reading is the concluding paragraph of A Vast Experiment, The Climate Crisis from A to Z by Elizabeth Kolbert. Climate change isn't a problem that can be solved by summoning the will. It isn't a problem that can be fixed or conquered, though these words are often used. It isn't going to have a happy ending or a win-win ending, or on a human timescale, any ending at all. Whatever we might want to believe about our future, there are limits, and we are up against them. The third reading is from Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. Excuse me. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. So end the readings. Excuse me. Well, a couple of times at the beginning or near the beginning of a new year, I've preached about the overlooked good news that many of us are unaware of. One such sermon was called The Outlook for Babies 2014, and it was packed with good news about the world and its future. So I thought, I'll do that again in 2023. It's always been very enjoyable for me to do the research and find some of the surprising stories and statistics that are hidden in the weeds, stories akin to the story of the Olympic, that forgotten unsinkable ship. And it's always on the occasions when I've done such a sermon, it's been amusing to me how irritated some liberals are to hear good news. So attached are we to our beliefs that things are getting worse all the time. So I read over my previous such sermons and then started looking for updated information, updated good news, and there's a ton of it, a ton. It's amazing. But this time I ran smack dab into my denial about the climate crisis. Not that I'm a climate crisis denier, far from it. I just kept on choosing not to deal with it from the pulpit or really at all. Call it moral cowardice, if you will, for that is what it is. But this time, I can't avoid it. I can't dodge it. In the past, I could minimize or ignore the news reports, but there was something about the wildfire smoke this past fall that penetrated my willed obliviousness. Something in those yellow-brown skies day after day, the ash on top of my car in those mornings. In my journal on October 20th, I wrote, "One feels caged, helpless." It's not my purpose today to talk about the climate crisis. Many of you probably know far more about it than I do, especially since I've been avoiding it. But what I want to address is the despair that I see good friends succumbing to from time to time when they feel caged and helpless. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I will tell you some shocking and possibly irritating news about good things that are happening on our planet. So tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. From time immemorial, human beings have confronted the despair of life. It's quite instructive and amazing to revisit the book of Ecclesiastes, which is part of the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible. So here's this guy, we don't know his name, but he was referred to as Kohelet, which means the preacher or the teacher. This book, which we call Ecclesiastes, was written around 300 BC. It's a very surprising book to find in the Bible because it's a bitter and cynical diatribe with nothing to say about the redeeming or saving power of God. The author, it seems to me, has in quite a Unitarian way taken an unvarnished look at the realities of life and the inevitability of death and has succumbed to depression. Every human effort is meaningless. Vanity. After giving it's a really depressing book to read. I'm not necessarily recommending it, but I'll just tell you about it. Every human effort is vanity, useless. So after he gives this thorough catalog of all the evils and futilities of life, the preacher concludes that there's nothing really to be done but to enjoy eating and drinking, to enjoy one's work as much as possible, to love one's family, and to behave with wisdom. People should enjoy life while they can, for time may come when no one can. Despair may well sweep over us from time to time. It may well seem that all is vanity and hopeless. And it may well be true. Whatever we might want to believe about our future, there are limits, and we are up against them. Catastrophic global warming is happening, but it's happening fairly slowly in terms of our lifetimes. We don't live in one of the best countries for adapting to climate change, but we do live near the second best city in the United States after San Francisco. Humanity can do things that might mitigate or slow it a little bit, but mostly what we will be doing is adapting to constantly changing conditions. Very difficult after 10,000 years of fairly consistent climate conditions. The more creative, focused, and adaptable we are as a species, the better our chances of lengthening our survival. 2 weeks ago, I was in a museum in Prescott, Arizona. It has an excellent section on prehistory. And when I first went into that part of the museum, I admired the delicate little arrowheads on display, the size of your thumb, the tip of your thumb. Totally tiny little arrowheads, and I thought they were kind of cute. And then I learned some stuff. There was a huge environmental change that happened about 11,000 years ago. It's known as the Pleistocene/Holocene transition. Pleistocene-Holocene transition, bad time. A great number of mammals became extinct, among them the large mammals such as mastodons, on which the people depended. Suddenly, within about 40 years, people were no longer hunting and feasting on giant mammals, but painstakingly hunting tiny rodents for food. The hunting knowledge of the grandparents was useless to the grandchildren who survived by adapting to the new conditions. The giant spears were no longer of any use. Those tiny arrowheads that I thought were so cute are the relics of that adaptation. The people were now hunting little rodents in order to stay alive. What a terrible time it must have been. And yet, some of the people did survive and eventually even thrived. What good does despair do? None whatsoever. We succumb to it from time to time. That's natural. But to stay locked in despair paralyzes us, prevents us from giving our gifts to the world. It prevents us from loving what's here. It prevents us from enjoying the beauty of the world, from experiencing joyful awe at the creation. And that, it seems to me, is an insult to the people who will come after us, the ones who will be dealing with the worst effects of the climate catastrophe. Both despair and Pollyannaism are useless. In a way, both are sins. It breaks my heart when I see people I care about succumbing to the paralysis of despair. Well, I was kind of in despair writing the sermon, so I called up one of the wisest people I know, my spiritual director, Jeannie. I call her Saint Jeannie, and she says, oh. Jeannie is a Catholic layperson and quite active in local environmental efforts. She told me that a couple of years ago, she had been totally overwhelmed by feelings of hopelessness when she learned about the extent of our climate situation. But she came forth from that period with a new sense of strength and resilience. Jeannie said, to spiritually overcome the paralysis, we have to face the enormity of the tragedy and then be willing to be in the moment and be grateful that we are here and savor the beauty of the world. Our love for the world is a contribution not only to our own sense of peace, but to the health and spirit of the natural world. Our energy of savoring and loving is a tangible, healing energy. We carry that love around with us. We're open to small ways that we can help, and we stop feeling guilty that the ways aren't bigger. Jeannie also shared a teaching from the late Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. to be mindfully aware of our own reactions. When the distress and despair appear in your mind, to simply say, oh, hello, there you are again, as if to a friend, and carry on with what is ours to do. Meanwhile, the world goes on. We have our lives to live. Our world is so beautiful. We do it a disservice if we let our despair block our love or savor of that beauty. I'd like to hold up a role model, someone I'm very close to. She's taught climate change to high school students, and retired now, she has become a citizen scientist, contributing to the data of climate change by tracking local bird populations, planting pollinator gardens, working with the stream keepers to measure bacteria levels in the local stream, and helping to eliminate non-native plants in the local nature sanctuary. She knows all about global warming. She has taught climate change. And she finds peace in these useful activities. And she says, this is a perfect time to become a citizen scientist. Meanwhile, the world goes on, and here is some of the good news about our world. This is just a tiny sample of the good news that goes on all the time that we don't hear about, because generally speaking, good news happens slowly and bad news happens fast. So good news seldom makes it into the headlines and news bulletins. If I could communicate just one message to help you achieve more inner peace, I would say this. This is the controversial part of the sermon. If you watch the news on TV regularly, please consider cutting back or stopping entirely. It is very bad for you, elevating your anxiety and eventually even affecting your physical health. Put yourself on the TV news diet or switch entirely to other media, especially those that intelligently digest the news and put it in context before presenting it. I see one enthusiastically nodding person, maybe a couple of you. I'm just leaving. Yeah, I'm not going to check in on you. I probably, and look for media that relate the good news, the slow news, as well as the bad. I probably watch at most 2 hours of TV news a year. But go ahead, be irritated with me. I felt the same way when I was advised to quit smoking. So here is a quiet barrage of good news. This isn't systematic. It's just a random assortment. Please don't be too shocked. Global population growth is slowing down dramatically and will inevitably decline due in large part to the increased educational and employment opportunities for women. Fewer people on the planet will reduce humanity's environmental footprint and competition for resources. Since the early 1990s, the United States cancer mortality rate has fallen by 1/3. Because of global efforts to preserve the ozone layer of our atmosphere, the infamous hole in the ozone layer is disappearing, and the ozone layer is expected to be back to 1980 levels by the middle of this century. The forests of New England are making a comeback. Those forests which were so decimated by farming and the Industrial Revolution that our Unitarian friend Henry David Thoreau believed the wilderness could never recover in New England. This wilderness comeback has happened so incrementally that it's easy to miss. But today, 80% of New England is covered by forests or thick woods. It's a far cry from the mere 30% that remained forested in most parts of the region in the mid-1800s. Child mortality rates have plummeted worldwide. Substantial declines in child mortality have occurred across all regions of the world. Average rates of child mortality in Africa are now lower than the average rates in Europe were in 1950. By and large, the world is much, much safer than it's been in centuries. There are fewer wars worldwide, and the wars that do happen are less deadly. Babies that come into the world today, anywhere in the world, have life expectancies twice as long as babies who were born in 1950. Just a few more of these. Literacy levels for the world population have risen drastically in the last couple of centuries. In 1820, only 12% of people in the world could read and write. Today, only 14% of the world population now remain illiterate. Renewable energy sources make up a growing fraction of the energy supply, and they're getting cheaper every year. And finally, globally, extreme poverty has decreased drastically, especially in the past half century. This is a quote from Stephen Pinker. He says, unfortunately, the media is overly obsessed with reporting single events and with things that go wrong. It does not pay nearly enough attention to the slow developments that reshape our world. If the media accurately reported global development, a typical headline would be, the number of people in extreme poverty fell by 130,000 since yesterday, 130,000. But since on average, there were 130,000 people fewer in extreme poverty every single day, they should have had this headline every single day since 1990. I could go on and on, but I commend to you the source of this information, most of this information. It's the website called Our World in Data. It doesn't just tell good news, it tells bad news too, but it's balanced and factual. Our World in Data. We are dishonoring the beings who will follow us if we don't love our world now, if we don't live our full lives now and focus on what we can do, what we're called to do. Here's a little something we can do. A friend of mine, he's a Unitarian Universalist, retired positive psychology professor, Gerald Forster. He suggests that we make a practice of asking one another, what went well? I made a conscious practice of doing this in a recent week. I had two rather downhearted spiritual direction clients. After they talked about things that were giving them distress, I asked, what's going well for you? And in both cases, they came up with far more things than they had been consciously aware of, and were soon laughing and smiling. All I did was say, what's going well for you? So we might make a practice of asking one another this question, what went well? What's going well in your life these days? And we might also ask this of our world. What's going well? If we look beyond the stories of doom and gloom on which our media depend, you'll find a wealth of good news, heartening trends, surprising progress, good news to sustain us through the inevitable times of despair. My dear friends, may you savor and enjoy all the good things of your life right now. May you seek the beauty of the world, and through your love, may you find the work that is uniquely yours to do, the contribution that is uniquely yours to make. May you be richly blessed. Amen.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was really great. So we're now going to pause our recording Mary, if you could do that. As members and friends of Vashon Island United Unitarian Fellowship, we commit to supporting our fellowship. Financial resources help us pay speakers and staff, support our social justice programs, and maintain our buildings. Please support VIUF with your pledge and offering so that we can continue to be a vital community. Our fellowship engages beyond our walls for peace, social and economic justice, freedom of belief, and protection of our planet and inhabitants. Once a month, we contribute the financial offering to a community organization that aligns with our values. This week's offering supports our beloved community. Since we can't pass the basket this week, please send in your checks to our post office box or use the PayPal link on our website, or just bring your contribution next week instead. Thank you. And again, Leslie will play We Give Thanks, and if you'd like to join in, please do. Okay, Marilee's going to extinguish our chalice.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I think. This is called Wherever We Are, Love Is by the Reverend Dr. Deborah Hoffner. As we enter another week of uncertainty in the world, let us remember that there is only one side, that of humanity and planet Earth. May we pray for peace. May we raise our voices with our elected officials and engage as we can in acts of resistance. And may we remember to take very good care of ourselves, each other, and those. May we remember these words adapted from the Unity Prayer. The light of love surrounds us. Love enfolds us. The power of love protects us. Love watches over us. Wherever we are, love is.
Thank you. Our formal service is now ending, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our speaker, Reverend Amanda Aikman. Yay, wonderful message. To our chalice slider, Marilee, to Leslie for the lovely music, Mary for doing tech, and Kate for coordinating the service. And thanks everyone for being adaptable today and participating in Zoom while the heat gets fixed, and hopefully by next week, everyone will be back together again. Leslie's going to play us some wonderful music, and then we'll have announcements. Thank you, Leslie. It's great to